of 10 take immense pleasure in welcoming you all to this first Talk series. I would like to welcome our esteemed principal, Mr. Rajendra Prasad sir, our academic coordinator, Mrs. Shara Mohan ma'am, all the teachers and my dear friends. Welcome you all.
The object of war is not to die for your country, but to make the other die for it. Here comes Priya to define war.
War is not a single word. It's a word which means a lot. It can be organized violence among states or groups. The states can be having a different views of their opinions. This may lead to a huge violence which is known as war. And continuation of politics is another meaning. That is, war means the continuation of politics in different ways. And conflict between two opposing principles creates a huge war. And an enduring condition upon which states are found. That is, in example, the ethics and other wars like Ramayana and Mahabharata is a great example for this. And even the World War I and World War II is a great example. The destructions caused by the war are immense. The main is the life. They ruin all the lives of animals, plants, and other environment. Devastation is the main thing. And property loss is another cause. That is another destruction. You can see in the picture, that is the environmental devastation, and this is the ruined life, and that is that's also an example of the environmental devastation and the property loss. And one more thing is the damage of heritage, that is their culture. Due to the war, a great loss can happen, and even a culture and tradition may be devastated and damaged.
War does not decide who is right. It decides who is left. Here is Vibhushna to explain about two great wars, World War I and World War II.
World War I. World War I began on 28 July 1914 and it ended on 11 November 1918. Countries fought are the Allies, British Empire, France and the Russian Empire versus the Central Powers of Germany and Austria-Hungary. Destruction caused was that over 9 million combatants and 7 million civilians died. Reasons: assassination and effects of the war is the German Empire, Russian Empire, and Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire had ceased to exist. National borders were redrawn with several independent nations restored or recreated. Thank you. This was a picture of the countries before the war, and after war it got divided into so many countries, and these were the weapons used during the war. World War II. World War II began on 1939 and war ended on 1945. War was fought between the Allies and Axis. More than 100 million people from 30 countries participated in the war and 50 million to 85 million people died. Reason for this was the Treaty of Versailles, that it was an agreement between the German and the other countries. Effects: apart from ending the German aggression, there were many side effects of World War II. Another result of World War II was the formation of the United States UN.
In 1914, the tensions generated by international rivalries exploded into general war. The spark that led to the explosion occurred in the Bosnian town of Sarajevo, where Serb terrorists assassinated Austrian Crown Prince Franz Ferdinand. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and an intricate chain of alliances began to draw great powers into the war. Two sides formed, the Allies and the Central Powers. Russia was first to mobilize its army, coming to the aid of Serbia and provoking a German declaration of war. Bound by a treaty with Russia, France mobilized too. and when Germany violated the neutrality of Belgium, Britain declared war. Other European powers were soon drawn into the conflict, and eventually it turned into a global war, with the United States joining the Allies in 1917. Combat began on August 4th, when a German task force crossed the Belgian border and soon overran the country. 8 days later, Austria invaded Serbia. Russia attacked Germany, advancing into East Prussia and also striking at Galicia in Austria-Hungary. After achieving a major breakthrough in France, the German offensive began to stall just 15 miles from Paris. On the Eastern Front, the Germans met the Russians at Tannenberg and inflicted on them a crushing defeat. On the Western Front, the Allies counterattacked at the Marne, driving the Germans back, and at Ypres, they fought off a German drive to capture the vital Channel ports, with both sides racing to the sea in an effort to outflank the other. By Christmas 1914, the Western Front was stabilized, and a solid line stretched from the English Channel to Switzerland. On the Eastern Front, the Russians withdrew from East Prussia when the Germans attacked Poland. In the Caucasus region, the Turks seized Russian and Persian territory, but were driven back in January 1915. On the Eastern Front, Germany and Austria prepared for a new offensive. Launched in May, it advanced the front line 300 miles and resulted in 2 million Russian casualties. New Allied offensives in France achieved little, and at Ypres, the Germans initiated the use of poison gas with horrifying consequences. Italy entered the war in May, but in a series of fruitless drives at Austria, lost 280,000 men in 6 months. In an attempt to knock Turkey out of the war, the Allies launched an invasion at Gallipoli, but badly organized, it was abandoned in 1916. In the Balkans, armies from Austria, Germany, and Bulgaria finally overwhelmed all Serbian resistance. The Germans renewed their western offensive in 1916, attacking Verdun with the deliberate intention of leading white the French army. The defense of Verdun left over 500,000 French casualties. The Allies began their own counteroffensive at the Somme, where the British used tanks for the first time, but the attacks achieved little more than horrendous casualties. In the east, the Russians began the Brusilov offensive across a 300-mile-wide front. It was finally checked when German reinforcements were rushed in from Verdun. Encouraged by early Russian successes, Romania joined in the offensive, but the country was eventually occupied by Austro-German forces. The one major naval engagement of the war, the Battle of Jutland, fought in May 1916 between the main British and German fleets, ended indecisively. Elsewhere, Allied forces captured some Albanian territory, but lost ground in Greece while Russia advanced in Turkey. The British also advanced in Mesopotamia, and Colonel T.E. Lawrence, soon to gain worldwide fame as Lawrence of Arabia, helped organize an Arab revolt against the Turkish Empire. Anticipating a new Allied offensive in the spring of 1917, the Germans withdrew to the Hindenburg Line. In the attacks that followed, French casualties were so heavy that soldiers resorted to mutiny. Before the Germans could take advantage of the French setbacks, the British began a new offensive. They suffered 240,000 casualties in the Third Battle of Ypres. The Italians renewed their attacks at Sanzo, achieving some success at first, but German troops were rushed to the front, and driven back in catastrophic retreat, Italy lost 275,000 men as prisoners. The Allies suffered a worse setback when revolution toppled the Tsar. As the Russian army disintegrated, the Germans recaptured lost ground, and in December the Bolshevik government signed a truce with Germany, effectively ending Russian participation in the war. In the Middle East, the British took Baghdad, and breaking through Turkish defenses in Palestine, entered Jerusalem. By 1918, fresh American troops began to reach the Western Front in increasing numbers. The Germans planned a final assault before American manpower could influence the outcome. Shifting forces from the Russian front, they began a series of thrusts at the Allied lines, and eventually reached the Marne again. Newly arrived American troops staged one German offensive, and in the counterattack, seized Belleau Wood. The Germans renewed their efforts, but with American troops arriving at a rate of 300,000 a month, Allied counterattacks repulsed them. Having suffered 500,000 casualties in 5 months, the German army was spent, and the Allies took the initiative. The Americans attacked Saint-Mihiel and also spearheaded the Meuse-Argonne offensive. Although the Central Powers occupied huge areas of Russia, their war effort was collapsing. The Allies advanced in Italy, in the Balkans, and in the Middle East, and continued their offensive on the Western Front. With its forces in retreat, Germany asked for an armistice. On November 11, 1918, the fighting stopped. The Paris Peace Conference of 1919 imposed stiff reparations on the Central Powers, redrew the map of Europe and the Middle East, and sowed the seeds for a Second World conflict that would erupt 20 years later.
A true soldier fights not because he hates what is in front of him, but because he loves what is behind him. Here is Priya to give an intro about Syria war.
Hey, silence. Silence. Hey!
The Syria War, the recent war in the world. More than 250,000 Syrians have lost their lives in this war, and which began with the anti-government protests before escalating into a full civilian war. And this war happened for 4.5 years. More than 11 million have been forced from their homes as forces loyal to President Bashar al-Assad. Those opposed to his rule were killed, and jihadist militants were also entered from Islamic State, that is ISIS. The witch of the war. The war caused because of a single sentence, that is the revolution. The revolution sentence was written by the school students. So the 15 school students were arrested. This was the main reason for the big war which killed 250,000 people. And this incident happened in Jeddah in 2011. What do the protesters want and what did they get for that? At first, the protesters just wanted democracy and greater freedom. But once government opened fire on the people who opposed them, they wanted their president, Bashar al-Assad, to resign. But he refused to resign, and as the violence worsened, he offered to change something, the way the country was run. But protesters did not believe him. So President Assad also has quite a lot of people who helped him and supported him in various countries and in his country also.
Here is Trinity to explain the effects of war.
He speaks on the velvet of sand and sea, with as much as peace that can never be. He speaks assured of fairies and angels. He knows not, truth is always sweeter than fantasy. He sleeps with the memories of dad and mom, with a heartbreaking innocence to die for. Better to depart this land of heartless, where all the humanity has been washed ashore. They say a picture talks billions of words, but this one is worth a trillion tears. I wince at the mere thought of it. Is humanity dead just as the world fears? The picture is of a 3-year-old Syrian footballer, Alan Kurdi, lying dead on Turkey's beach. The child is said to be one of the 11 Syrian refugees who drowned after their boat sank. And after this incident, the world turned towards its attention to Syria war, and it became a global headline. State of Syrians. Almost 5 years after it began, the full-blown civil war has been killed killed over 22 lakh people. Bombings or destroying crowded cities and horrific human rights violations are widespread. Basic necessities like food and medical care are spared. UN said that 6.6 million people are internally displaced. More than half of the country's population of 23 million is in need of urgent humanitarian assistance. Effects of Syrian war. 7 million people internally displaced. Loss of labor force. 11 million people who have been displaced. About half of them are children under the age of 18. Deaths 32 lakhs. 18,864 women and children have been killed. Civilians 40.2% of deaths. Rebels and Islamic fighters 14.3% of deaths. Syrian army 18.3% of deaths. 1 million plus have been injured and 53% of Syrian population, that is 12.2 million out of 22.85 million, needs humanitarian aid.
Syria's war is a mess. After 4 years, the conflict is divided between 4 different sides on the ground. Each side has different foreign backers, and those foreign backers don't even agree with one another about who they're fighting for or who they're fighting against. To understand all these crisscrossing interventions, the moving battleground, it helps to go back to the beginning of the war and watch how it unfolded. The first shots in Syria's war were fired in March of 2011 by Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad against peaceful Arab Spring demonstrators. In July, some of the protesters start shooting back, and some Syrian troops even defect from Assad's army to join them. They call themselves the Free Syrian Army, and the uprising becomes a civil war. Extremists from Syria and from around the region start traveling to join the rebels. Assad actually encourages this by releasing jihadist prisoners to tinge the rebellion with extremism, make it harder for foreigners to back them. In January of 2012, Al-Qaeda forms its new branch in Syria called Jabhat al-Nusra. Also around it, Syrian Kurdish groups who've long sought autonomy take up arms and de facto secede from Assad's rule. That summer is when Syria becomes a proxy war. Iran, which is Assad's most important ally, intervenes on his behalf. By the end of 2012, Iran is sending daily cargo flights with hundreds of officers on the ground. At the same time, the oil-rich Arab states on the Persian Gulf begin sending money and weapons to the rebels, mainly to counter Iran's influence, and mainly through Turkey. Iran steps up its influence in turn in mid-2012 when Hezbollah, which is a Lebanese Shia group backed by Iran, invades to fight alongside Assad. So the Gulf states respond by sending even more money and weapons to rebels. Saudi Arabia really leading the effort at this point, and this time going a lot through Jordan, who also opposes Assad. So by 2013, the Middle East is divided between generally Sunni powers on one side supporting rebels and Shias on the other side supporting Assad. Now that April, the Obama administration, horrified by Assad's atrocities, signs a secret order authorizing the CIA to train and equip Syrian rebels. The program stalls out at first. At the same time, the U.S. quietly urges the Arab Gulf states to stop funding the extremists, but their requests go ignored. In August, Assad uses chemical weapons against civilians in the town.
Men, women, children lying in rows, killed by poison gas. It is in the national security interests of the United States to respond to the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons through a targeted military strike.
Russia proposed on Monday that Syria surrender control over its chemical weapons to the international community for its eventual dismantling to avoid a U.S. military strike.
The U.S. ends up backing down, but the whole thing establishes Syria as a great powers dispute, with America against Assad and Russia backing it. Just weeks later, the first American training in arms through that CIA program finally reached Syrian rebels. The U.S. is now a participant in the Syrian war. In February 2014, something happens that transforms the war. An Al-Qaeda affiliate, mostly based in Iraq, breaks away from the group over internal disagreements over Syria. The new group calls itself the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria and becomes Al-Qaeda's enemy.
ISIS doesn't fight Assad. Instead, it fights the other rebels and it fights the Kurds, carving out a unique state in Syria that it calls its caliphate. That summer, it marches across Iraq, seizing territory and galvanizing religions. Then, in September, almost exactly 1 year after it almost bombed Assad in Syria,
We're moving ahead with our campaign of airstrikes against these terrorists, and we're prepared to take action against ISIL in Syria as well.
That summer, the Pentagon launches its own program to train Syrian rebels. But unlike the CIA program, this one will only train rebels who fight just ISIS, not Assad. And the program fizzles out, showing that America now opposes ISIS more than Assad, but also that there's really no like-minded force on the ground in Syria. In August, Turkey begins bombing Kurdish groups in Iraq and in Turkey, even as Kurds are fighting ISIS in Syria. Turkey also doesn't bomb ISIS in Syria. All of this deepens tension with the U.S. over this question of whether they need to treat Assad or ISIS the primary enemy, and creates a lot of confusion among the Kurds about where the U.S. stands. Now, Assad has been losing ground all this time, to ISIS, to the rebels, and in September of 2015, Russia intervenes in his behalf. Russia said that they would bomb ISIS, but in fact it just bombs the anti-Assad rebels, including some rebels who are backed by the U.S. So as it stands now, there are lots of different groups and outside countries involved in Syria's war, and even among allies there are big disagreements about who their enemies are, who to support, and how to do it. And those contradictions are a big part of why, for this war, there's just no end in sight.
War can cause lots of destruction to a beautiful country like Syria, and it has huge impact on lives of people and their education. Let us now see how Syria was before war and after war. To conclude the session.
War not only caused damages to the environment, but also it changed the lives of millions of people in Syria. War not only caused damages to the lives of people and also the environment, the impact of war was very worse and painful. Many people lost their lives and thousands of people migrated to different places to escape from war. As true humans, work together against war and terrorism and make our world a peaceful place.
The war will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything. Mankind has put an end to war before war put an end to mankind. Here comes Soumya with a vote of thanks.
Peace is not something you wish for. It is something that you make, something you do, something you ask, and something you give away. In a country where wars are fought, peace cannot exist. Only the dead have seen the end of the war. Let us wage a glorious triumph and put an end to the war. Hope you came to know a lot